This is Mr. MegaManFan. Like, share, comment, and subscribe. You know all the things to do. We're going to talk about something silly today. Maybe you would even say it's a little bit dumb. But when I say it's dumb, I don't mean that the developer of the game is dumb. I don't mean that any of the people involved in the controversy are dumb. I just mean that the overall up and down of the value of the game and how the market reacted to the whole thing is dumb. This is Revenge of the Bird King for PlayStation 4. I paid under $20 for this before shipping, and it just arrived in the mail. And the reason that's so interesting to me is that this was not always a $20 game. Now, maybe more than 5 years ago, a video came out on the Metal Jesus Rocks channel where he talked about getting a copy of this game. The original video seems to have since been deleted. I found this capture of the original video in another YouTuber's video and took a freeze frame of it right here to compare to the copy that I got in the mail, and they look more or less the same, including M7 games, and I'm going to explain why that's so interesting. So to start out with, this game was originally supposed to be released by Limited Run Games, or so said Metal Jesus in his original video. And apparently there was some sort of snafu with that situation where it had to be released digitally at the same time as physically, and for some reason wires got crossed and they couldn't agree, Sony and the developer, and because it didn't get released digitally, the developer of the game had to sit on all the physical copies of it that he had. Well, eventually he got tired of that and started selling them privately to friends, colleagues, collectors. I can't fault him for that. It's his game. He developed it. He had 1,000 copies, maybe more, maybe less, but print runs tend to be a minimum of 1,000. So if you're sitting on 1,000 copies of a game you made that you originally intended to be sold physically through Limited Run, eventually you'd want to just say, "Ah, to heck with it, it's my game, I'm going to sell it if I want to," right? That's his right to do so. The problem is, when Metal Jesus, again, not saying that he engineered this, and a lot of people tried to blame him for it at the time, and I don't think that was his intention or the case or any sort of scam on his part, which a lot of people tried to label it as, which really, if you get all the facts, I don't think it is. But when he did his video about it and showed it off, it caused a bit of a stir. People were like, well, if Metal Jesus has this game, I want a copy of this game too. It's supposed to be a Limited Run game, but Limited Run didn't put it out, and that makes it really cool, so I want to get a copy of this game. And in the video, the original video, he mentioned something about DMing the developer, whose name is Joe, and like a lot of other people, I DM'd him, and unfortunately I think the poor guy got overwhelmed and just turned off his DMs and didn't want to deal with it, which, when you have a YouTube channel the size of Metal Jesus Rocks and the kind of attention that a video can get, and how we even talk about the Metal Jesus bump when he mentions an obscure video game and it suddenly shoots way up in value. Again, not saying that's his fault or that he engineers artificial price hikes. I'm just saying, when you have a big channel and you cover something, it's going to get a lot of attention. So Revenge of the Bird King, a previously little known game to that point, was suddenly on everybody's radar. And Joe shut down, and I don't blame Joe for that. And if I would fault Metal Jesus for one thing, it's maybe not, considering what could happen, maybe that wasn't the wisest decision. Kind of like the time that Aaron and Dan from the Game Grumps were reading a GameFAQs guide for a game, and they mentioned how bad it was, and then they mentioned the person by name who wrote it, and that person got doxxed and harassed. You know, it's like, sometimes you gotta think about the size of the audience when you say things and the consequences that could result from that. Again, not saying that either one of them are bad people, but, you know, consider what you're doing when you're doing it, because things can happen. So let's move on and look at how the Twitter fallout went with this situation. Because Metal Jesus ended up having to respond to the controversy on social media, and he said, "At no time did I have a conversation about trying to artificially raise the price of Revenge of the Bird King. I was sent review copies," which I'm going to assume was from Joe, "and I thought it was an interesting story about a physical PS4 game that was canceled. My idea for the video was to share with physical collectors an opportunity to buy the game at the retail price if they were interested. I think people can still get it at gaming expos. My sole conversation with Joe was around PlayStation trophies for people who hunt them. That's it." So maybe he didn't get them from Joe. I don't know. That's it. In retrospect, perhaps it was naive of me. Okay, we do agree on that part. However, I'm not a reseller, and that's not how I think, and that's never my goal. One look at my game collection, you'll see I keep stuff forever. Now, the other stuff about Kelsey, I don't even know what that's going on about, so I'm just gonna not even mention that. But a lot of people tried making a lot of hay out of this situation and saying that Metal Jesus was doing something nefarious. And people even made fake videos pretending they had DMs from him, which is a really scummy thing to do. Now, my focus here is not whether Metal Jesus is a good or a bad person, whether he made a good decision or a bad decision. My focus here is to look at the artificial value of this game when people got their hands on copies. Presumably they bought them from Joe at Expos, as Metal Jesus said in his tweet about the whole thing, because Joe was not responding to DMs. He didn't respond to me, didn't respond to anybody, and you can see those copies that people had. Some of those copies were getting flipped for outrageous amounts, up to $200 if you were lucky enough to buy one from Joe and you decided not to keep it. You were able to make a mint. Well, you were for a while, but then something interesting happened. For a very brief period of time in 2021, and you can look at the Wayback Machine and see archived versions of the site. It was a very bare bones website, but it was a website for M07 Games, Joe's studio, and it just basically said Revenge of the Bird King physical copies coming soon, and then one day the website with just a black background and HTML text said Revenge of the Bird King now on sale. And then shortly after that, the website stopped selling it. I guess he sold out his inventory, and then eventually the site just got parked, and now it doesn't even exist. But in 2021, there was a time where he was selling them online, probably because he got tired of seeing people buy them from him at a convention just to immediately flip them for a huge profit. So he just decided to dump the remaining stock of the game that he had. And as you can see, once that happened, the price dropped dramatically and has continued to drop ever since then. Although the average is still being reported as $42, that's not necessarily indicative of what they're going for these days. That's around what I paid for mine before shipping. Let me move the camera over here a little bit. It might have been closer to $18, $19 before shipping. With shipping and tax, it ended up being $25. But let's just stop to consider that for a moment. I have a new copy here. Cost me about $25 total with everything. It used to go for $200. That's what I mean when I say this whole thing is kind of stupid. Like, I don't think Joe is stupid. I don't think Metal Jesus is stupid. I think some of the controversy around the game, people got in their feelings and got very mad about it. It wasn't handled the best by all parties all around. And even to some degree, I would say Joe could have handled it better. He could have just dumped his entire stock at once instead of having individual copies get flipped for exorbitant amounts. He wasn't necessarily engineering it that way, but people were taking advantage of him if they ran into him at a show and bought one in person and then turning around and flipping it for huge money. So that's the part where I would have said, you know, maybe Joe should have just released his whole stock at once. But he may also have been afraid to do so because there was a deal in place to release it digitally and physically at the same time. Well, I've got good news for you. You can get the game digitally now, and you're not going to pay huge prices for it digitally. Revenge of the Bird King for Nintendo Switch, $4.99. So if you don't even care about having a physical copy of it, $5. The stock was eventually sold one way or the other. And my bottom line on this is, it's a curiosity, but it's not something that I think people should be spending huge amounts of money on. Certainly not $200. And to prove that point, I'm going to just go ahead and open it up here because I didn't buy it to keep it sealed. And I don't care if it goes back up in price later. I'm going to buy it and actually play it. Oh no, I've lowered the value. Right, whatever. There it is. Revenge of the Bird King. And if you saw some of those listings that said cover variants, well, that's just the obverse of the cover art. Some had it facing one way, some had it facing the other. When you get games printed these days, you can have them flip the cover art either way, and then collectors can turn it inside out if they want. I'm going to fire up my PlayStation 5. I assume since it's a PS4 game, it will be compatible. And then we will very briefly look at this one-time wildly controversial game just because people were mad that they couldn't get a copy of it. Except now I need to grow another gun. I don't even know how I picked it up the first time. Oh, square. Okay. So as you can see, it's an interesting platformer, but I wouldn't go, holy crap, $200? Sold, I'll pay that. No. It's cute. It might even be above average, but oh, I see. You only use the sword to cut the vines, and you use the guns to shoot the enemies. Oops. And apparently I was nowhere near a save point because it looks like I've gone all the way back to the beginning. Yeah, that's unfortunate, but that's enough footage to show you what Revenge of the Bird King is all about.